Here we go again.
All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. On today's show, I am joined by Kayvon Afsarifard. I already butchered it. Look at that. Kayvon, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Evan. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, such a pleasure. And it's been a long time coming since I met you out in California. You're a yoga teacher. You have a really beautiful practice and view, and I think purpose that I see you, putting into action with all that you're doing. And it's a pleasure to get you on here because when I first met you about a year ago, I had just started the show, and I was like, Kayvon would be a pretty cool guest, and I was just like, we'll see how that like materializes. So it's cool that it's kind of come full circle, and I got you on here, and we can collaborate on this. So,
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And yeah, it's been a while since we've seen each other, but I'm really excited, and I listened to some of the stuff that you've been putting out here, and it really resonates with a lot of the things that I'm passionate about. So I'm excited to dive into this conversation.
yeah, definitely. And I'd love to start. I mean, you just started up a new page just the other day, Mindful Life Solutions, and I feel like that really encompasses a lot of, the work that you're doing and what you're passionate about. So, I mean, I'd love if you wanted to just sort of dive into what your intention is with that and sort of what, your focus is in all that you do.
Yeah, so for me, I've actually had a long experience with mindfulness and meditation practices. When I was a kid, my dad would play Thich Nhat Hanh cassette tapes on the way to school, and it was something for me that I never really quite understood at that age what it was that I was sort of absorbing. I would say even almost through osmosis. But
Mm,
yeah, and as I've kind of grew up as an athlete, I learned a lot about the flow state and becoming really focused, and how the ability to harness your awareness into something and to take that and sort of aim it in different directions is it's almost like its own sort of superpower, I would say. And it, has become something that I see in the modern world that we live in, that actually has become, I would say, harder and harder to do. That we have so many distractions, so many things pulling at our attention in so many different ways. And to come back to a place that we call home within ourselves, and to recognize this experience moment to moment really is something I'm passionate about sharing with people. And I like to share that at many different levels too, because I think, we kind of have narrowed it in some ways, where people think that, mindfulness is just for somebody to sit and, it's just going to help me get better at this thing or that thing. And really sort of, even if you remove the layer of functionality, it's just helping you to live a more meaningful life, one that you can actually be with on a day-to-day basis, and kind of be present to all those subtle shifts and changes that occur over time.
mm,
And so I work with children, teaching them mindfulness in one of my current positions as a practicum student for clinical psychology. um, Another way in which I've worked with people's athletes, teaching them mindfulness, as well as now I'm starting to integrate a little bit into some of the startup world and helping them get their culture in order, and being able to work on things like having clear and effective communication, so that you know people cultivate an atmosphere that really embodies this sense of mindfulness and the sense of being attuned to one another and all the things that are happening. Um, yeah.
right, definitely. And I love that you brought up there's almost sort of a misconception around, mindfulness or meditation where it's like you do just sort of sit and you like zen out for a minute and then you just maybe go back to regular life, whatever that may be. It's almost like become a buzzword in a sense. But I
Yeah.
think there's that deeper meaning that goes with it where you can really begin to explore certain parts of yourself that you never knew to exist, but they're almost sort of the more real parts of ourselves. Like, how can I not just find, a lot of people use mindfulness for like anxiety, for example, not just sort of alleviating anxiety in like the temporal moment, but how can we sort
Mhm.
of explore these issues on sort of a more deeper level. And I think that's something that as you get into mindfulness, maybe a lot of times you go for that sort of short-term fix. We discover that it's sort of a whole world in itself, and it can really change our foundation in a lot of ways. And I mean, is there a way that you found that people can begin to sort of explore that in that context and like sort of bring a deeper intention to it, a deeper meaning?
Yeah, Evan, I think that's a really great question. Well, as you might know, mindfulness was kind of brought to the West through a lot of the teachings of John Kabat-Zinn. He developed this mindfulness-based stress reduction, right, to help people with chronic conditions, to work through different disorders and so on and so forth. And I think that got sort of medicalized in a way that took away some of the more just experiential aspects of mindfulness, where this can also serve as a way of increasing sort of the range of experience. Like you talk about anxiety, for example, right? There's many different gradations of anxiety, and each person sort of experiences that in different symptoms or psychological manifestations. So being able to really notice for yourself, like, what sort of impulse is perhaps driving me at any given moment, right? That can serve as such a impactful tool to self-awareness, right? Like, oh, I tend to do this in these certain situations, right? That in and of itself can help you become less of a slave, basically, to this. In our psychology world, we call it the id, an old Freudian term of like those basic fundamental drives, but like for me, I notice if I am a hungry person, I'm an angry person, or at least my temper is very short, right? Like
Right.
it's becoming aware of things like that so that you can better manage all the different parts of yourself that you learn to come into relationship with. And the other thing is to recognize too that a lot of these things, although they might not change as much as we might think, it happens very slowly over time. And I think we're very much in a society where we're kind of expecting like the magic pill. Like, well, if I meditate 10 minutes a day and keep at it for a while, like maybe there'll be some subtle shifts. But we have to also recognize that where these traditions came from, people would spend months and years out in the woods, essentially, or in the jungles, and just being with every aspect of themselves and the nature of consciousness. And that's where I think there's a lot to be gleaned in sort of these moments where we sit with ourselves. And that's where I think a lot of the new mindfulness work has been a lot embodying the notion of acceptance. Dialectical behavioral therapy includes this blend of acceptance and change, right? Because we have to be with things as they are, right? It doesn't mean that we have to tolerate everything, that we just kind of put up with it, but it gives us the sense that, well, if I'm dealing with reality on its terms, then I can actually formulate a reasonable way of addressing whatever the issue might be.
Right, definitely. And I think a big part of the culture that we live in, I've noticed there is sort of an unconscious desire to really run from ourselves and run from reality, because the reality we're living in, I mean, there is a lot of areas to change, to put it mildly, I would say. And so, but to sort of take that head on and really engage in a mindfulness practice can really give you a better grip on how to really become a creator of that reality. I think it can almost sort of switch the mindset over time. And it's a great point that you brought up, that it isn't overnight, because we do live in very much an instant gratification society, you could say. But it really gives you the ability to really become a creator of reality, instead of allowing reality to sort of dictate who it is that you are. And you can almost go past the norms of culture to create something that, create who you want to be and discover who you are. And I feel like a lot of the ways we live almost disconnect us from our true nature, from And however you want to see that as, I don't necessarily have the answer as to what is humanity's true nature, but
Mhm.
we're really disconnected from ourselves. And I feel like mindfulness offers a path of self-discovery and almost a path of unlearning. And uh,
Mhm.
and I don't know if you wanted to speak on that path. I feel like it's something that is lifelong, and there is no like, everyone speaks of like enlightenment, but I don't think that's necessary. There is no like end destination per se.
Yeah, I think this ties really neatly into the notion of meaning, right? That, we things have to mean something is kind of like this fallacy that we've all believed.
Yeah.
Even that you talk about culture, it's like, oh, well, there should be a purpose to your life, and there should be something very, you know,
Hmm.
intentional of what you're doing with it. And what if the best intention you can have is to live an examined life, one
Hmm.
that is, being present to yourself, being connected in relationship, and being able to find joy in small moments. I think that hits on a piece that kind of helps me conceptualize where this mindfulness plays in from an evolutionary perspective. And I'm sure you've heard of the negativity bias, right? That those
Hmm.
who thought that the rustle in the bushes was a lion was much more likely to survive than the person who thought, well, it's probably a bunny rabbit. So
Right. Right.
it's uh, it's we're our brains are essentially wired to give us the notion that things are full of fear and full of threats, and that we should be doubtful and that we shouldn't trust ourselves. And this is a big part of like how we are predispositioned, even aside from culture, right? Culture can exacerbate or um, make things you know change that in some ways, but I think it goes a little bit deeper into the fact that when we can actually get into a meditative state consistently over time, you're sort of rewiring the brain to be more capable of experiencing um, different like psychological states. And that's something that's always been fascinating to me. You and I met as you were a student at one of my workshops I was teaching, and so I always loved seeing people after their yoga practice, right? The kind of like awareness, the clearness, the lucidity that everybody brings at that moment. And even if it wasn't that great of a practice, right? There's a coming back home to yourself and a sense of grounding that fundamentally changes something. I remember when I first started practicing yoga, I was shocked at how bright and distinct colors were after
Yeah.
I got out of a class. I was like, I wouldn't have noticed that before. And like, I think that's one of the reasons that I was very drawn to yoga as this in between from my sports background of like playing soccer at a very high level and then going into yoga practices, that I was able to put this mindfulness, this awareness into embodied action, like this ability to not only control, because I don't know that control is like the right frame for how to be with your body in sort of a movement practice. Like obviously control is important in
Mhm.
terms of how you move, but you know the notion that you're able to withstand discomfort or new sensation and able to integrate new information that comes in through this physical practice. So yeah, I think what you mentioned about culture and finding your own path, it's really like even being present enough or mindful enough, say, to notice what really are the things that sort of light you up on the inside. What are the
Mhm.
things that you really feel called by? And that can be a hard thing, because again, it comes back to that: do I trust myself enough to sort of launch into a new path or a new idea? And um,
Right.
that can be hard. Right.
Right. Those first sort of leaps of faith, if you will, when you're jumping into the unknown. It's, like you said, we're really taught to fear the unknown. And it's goes back to our, like evolutionary, like upbringing. Like if we weren't like scared as the hunter gatherers, chances are we probably wouldn't be here right now. So I guess it's a good thing that fear programming exists in our biology. But, and I tend to think of it in like an evolutionary standpoint often in terms of like how are humans sort of evolving? Because we're very much like in sort of the baby stages of this modern world, like very much so, like in terms of the grand scheme of time, or like humans have been here for hundreds of thousands of years, and yet for the last, I don't know, how long is these how long have we been able, would we be able to like have a podcast like this? Maybe 10 years,
Right.
like that's 0.00 something percent of that time. So
Yeah.
it's, I feel like we're still really, as a species, almost have to adjust. And that rewiring that you talk about, I feel as, maybe as the species evolves, like that'll be something that, you know, when children are born in the coming generations is something we focus on, that will be more of a norm, and coming into greater awareness and presence. And I love the term you use, coming home, like, because I deeply resonate with that, but sometimes I have trouble like putting into words what that might mean for people. I don't know if you wanted to
Mm.
elaborate on that, because I think it's like almost it's like a profound concept, but I deeply resonate with it.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it a little more. I think it really stems from recognizing how much, and the pandemic, I think, really highlighted this for me as well, is how much of our identity, this sense of self, is really wrapped up in everything that surrounds us. The people that we spend our time with, the places that
Mhm.
we go, the information that we're constantly consuming. Like, we consume so much information now. So to give yourself and to give ourselves this break from that, and to kind of recognize, like, oh, there's like this inner voice that I'm hearing. Like, we think of people who have inner voices as sort of crazy, right? And
Yeah.
it's when you get quiet enough, sometimes you recognize, like, wow, there's like this voice that just will not be quiet, and it's common for everyone. You have
Yeah.
your own inner conscious, as some people say. And um, yeah, so navigating that, I think, and being able to come back to home, is just being grounded enough to, like, okay, I don't need to care about this thing in this moment. We're kind of, you go back to the conditioning that you talked about. Like, we're conditioned, whether it be by our interactions with our early caregivers, our parents especially. Those are very formative experiences, but also teachers and other adults and other kids as you grow up through adolescence and on and on. So the influences are continuous, and a lot of times the way in which our experiences are formed around those people is oftentimes with intense emotions, and that's the part of our brain that is the most primitive. It's the amygdala. It's the very prime part of the brain that kind of sends out our reptilian
Mhm.
response to things, which is usually based in that sort of anger and fear. And so when we're not operating on that system, so to speak, we're a lot more free to connect, to um, find value in the small moments in life. And that's where I really think the magic happens, is when you can start to fundamentally shift the brain's nature towards that. There's something I've
Mm.
taught people to do called the savoring practice. So taking something, these little moments that we have, like a small victory, say, like you have some big promotion at work, or you have some other thing that happens that you're really proud of yourself for, and it's gone like that. It's a blip in time. But the rest of the time, we're usually sitting in some sort of anxious worry about something that's going to happen, or worried about something that happened in the past and how that affects us now. And it's just, that whole time we're sort of caught up on this roller coaster, or this ride that we can't get off. And then when we can get off, it's like, oh, how would I now like to spend my attention? Because I like to think of it as like this, almost like a limited resource, right? Our attention and our time are our two most valued and cherished things, I would think.
Right. No, I would definitely agree. And it's it's amazing to sort of think about like how often, even, with a mindfulness practice, I still catch myself in moments of overthinking about a particular future, what things that we want to, have happen. And that's such a normal conditioned thing to do, that, even on, a mindfulness journey, uh it's important to sort of recognize that it is okay to have that happen. And, planning for the future or understanding or coming to grips with things of the past is a normal thing, but it's about sort of letting go of that attachment to it and that like need to let it run your life. Cause I definitely noticed since I've started, engaging in mindfulness and meditation and yoga, the switch for where those things really ruled my life to now they're just like, oh, okay, I see them, I understand, but it's not going to be my dominant like state of being per se, and sort of,
Hmm.
really grounding into something deeper. And, that something deeper, oftentimes I think it is just who we are, like coming home to ourselves, being the person we want to be, and sort of choosing, for example, like love. I think that's I think a lot of people, everybody's felt love, but they're like, do we truly like know what love is if we're not spending like conscious time building it up in ourselves? And I think that's a huge part of, mindfulness and really recognizing uh, our place here and like on
Mm.
earth. And when we sort of really start to think about like what is the deeper meaning of uh, being here. And I love that you brought up it was towards the beginning of when we were talking, what if the meaning is just simply I think you said something along the lines of it, just experiencing and, having
Yeah, living
gratitude
the
for
examined life.
living the examined life. And I think that's, we put so much time into like, what do I need to be doing? Like, what am I going to accomplish in the world? But from that state of examination, our purpose almost sort of just manifests itself in a lot of ways. And I think that's a profound piece of wisdom that like it's so simple, yet it's so difficult to really integrate. I mean, do you have like integration like practices that you found worked for you, and like would you've seen work in clients you've worked with?
Yeah, well, one thing that's, really helped me is sort of building regularity with any of these practices. So for one place that I really recommend people check out if they haven't is Waking Up course with Sam Harris.
Mm,
He talks about a lot of the different principles of mindfulness, and he has a whole range of topics that he discusses. But I think it comes to sort of like you have to start with a baseline level of awareness, and just to notice how to start with a sense of self and sort of aiming attention, right? So one thing they do in mindfulness-based stress reduction that I think is a really helpful integrative practice is a very simple body scan meditation. So oftentimes we're so discomfortable or so uncomfortable in our bodies that we can't sit still. We can't, sit for 10 minutes just because we're don't feel good in our bodies or something is bothering us. So we're fidgeting around and that disrupts our attention. So getting in a really comfortable lying down position and, finding some body scan meditation where you systematically go through the body and point your attention at different places and just noticing the sensations that are in that area, whether it be the noticing of pressure or temperature or tingling, whatever that appears there, just being fully open and noticing that. And
mm,
then moving your attention along the body and doing that through every region. That's one really simple integrative practice to sort of establish this baseline level of awareness. And then as you start to scaffold in any meditation or mindfulness practice, you notice there's many more phenomena that we can observe, whether it be our own visual field, looking out and sort of softening your gaze and staring almost at the air in front of an object that you're looking at can be a way of just sort of noticing like, oh, well, there seems to be this place that I'm looking from. And one thing that Sam Harris usually says as a cue in meditation is like, look for what's looking. And it's
mm,
a very simple cue that reminds you that there's not actually a seat of attention, right? Because we can experience things, if I feel something down in my knee, is it really over there? Or is that just happening right here, right now? That's an ache or that's a sensation that I feel. So to kind of build up that awareness to a point where not only are you noticing that there is no sort of center to experience, but now thoughts and emotions and other types of input that normally really take us, and capture our attention, I would say. So the idea that, something really bothers you and gets you upset emotionally is going to set off that primitive part of your brain, and you're almost hijacked in a way that you feel, oh, I need to respond this way, because that's sort of that what you referred to as like conditioning, but that's also just an impulse that's really hard to separate or decouple from. And the more that I've spent time doing this practice, the more I realize how many different thoughts are coming in a day, or how difficult it can be with some emotions to untangle. And I think that's where the work can be very tailored specifically to the individual, where over time you start to recognize, well, this is your reactive way of managing this type of feeling, like especially around uncertainty or whatever the specific circumstances are. And I think that's where, from my perspective, I like to integrate that with my patients that I see, or working with people in the yoga practice, is to notice how your attention is in each moment. And if you can do that consistently over time, it's not like you need to, do this only in formal meditation practice where you sit and you're quiet. But if you just notice, like, wow, I got really upset by that thing. And it can be very hard to kind of pull back in that moment, because we're, like I said, we're kind of already gripped by it, and we're already in the throes of, coming up with thoughts as to why this other person was wrong and what they did and how frustrating and annoying that is. And meanwhile, it would be 10 times easier if we could just kind of put it down, that it's not necessary to keep struggling. And I think that's where it goes back to that notion of acceptance. Like, this is part of the human condition. If we knew exactly what was going to happen every moment, like, what fun would that be?
Life would be pretty boring, honestly. It would be pretty boring. I like the uncertainty, the spontaneity. But you touched on some really beautiful points, and something that I've integrated in my own practice as well is to really set the intention for, whether it be meditation or yoga, for it to not necessarily about, craving a deep experience within, meditation. I think when people jump in, like, you have that intention of like, I want to like travel the astral realm. Like, you can do some interesting things in meditation in that regard if you make that your intention. But I found that, the deepest intention for me is to allow it to allow myself to carry this like state of awareness with me throughout the day. If I make that my intention, I've noticed, it really does make a difference in terms of just my overall reactability and sort of how I handle specific situations. And, can we stay calm in times that in the past would have triggered us and, set off that fuse. And so I think there's, just allowing the almost the flow state of meditation and yoga, and just, that awareness, and bringing that intention to have it with you in as many moments as you can, I think is the most powerful part about mindfulness, and when it can really translate to your everyday life and bring about profound changes. And you talked about it being sort of small changes, and I definitely agree. But, when you look at what 1,000 baby steps equals up to, I mean, let's say you meditate for a year, you could be an entirely new person after a year, and you don't even necessarily I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for the type of changes that we make in that time frame, because it always is, those small steps that lead to larger scale transformation, if you will. And, if it's with that positive intention, that transformation is going to be in turn positive, and, working towards whatever we want to work towards, whether it be emotionally, spiritually, or, even in our career paths. It really can translate to just about all parts of our lives and everything that we do. I don't know if you wanted to build on that. There's not much of a question in there.
No,
but
no, I, something that you mentioned kind of I noticed was that this notion of time and not being able to see sort of progress as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you think of a 10-year-old, 1 year of their life is 10% of their life. So the older we get, the harder it can be to notice changes over time. It tends to be a really interesting phenomenon that I've noticed over the past couple of years. It's like, why does it feel, like, I'm turning 30 this year, I'm 29. But why does it feel like, I still think I'm 20 years old for some reason? It's just like this, we kind of are stuck a little bit in that relationship with how we notice time. It is a construct. It is something that we build our beliefs and our ideas around, but yet it's so fundamental to like how we think about things. And it's been one of those weird things for me to look at as far as like experience is how time goes, because it's seeing progress or seeing changes over time is not something we're very good at. And I think it also goes back to this idea that we're constantly chasing after something, or we're, really wrapped up in our own thinking. And not to say that thinking is, antithetical to meditation, but it's when we don't know that that's what we're doing, when we're kind of like just, on the like treadmill, or the thought treadmill, so to speak, just continuing on. And it's like, you're not really doing anything in that moment. You're kind of just lost in this place of, a bunch of different fragmented ideas versus like, tuning into something that's tangible part of, experiencing consciousness is really where you can feel like time is not going so fast. Time is not just happening and then that week is over or that month is over. It's just, you can become more attuned to these shifts, and I call them shifts, but it's really, these states of being, and noticing, well, that, that's when I'm kind of off my baseline. Like, how many people really are conscious enough to know what their baseline level of, happiness is, or their baseline level of frustration is, or what have you? It's something that I think a mindfulness practice can help individuals cultivate, so that they can also create better connection and better relationship. And knowing yourself is one of the key ways to then be able to relate to another person.
Right. Definitely. And I would 100% agree. And, I turned 25 today. And when I woke up this morning, it was funny because it's not like I felt really any that much different than when I woke up yesterday. So it's like, it's all sort of that in that constructed, like there's like I guess in our society, we have certain ages. You're like, we almost sort of compare ourselves to what other people have done by a certain age. Like if I wanted to compare myself to my brother, for example, it's like, oh my gosh, he's already married by the time he was 23. And people can sort of take that and like almost feel down about maybe not being at a specific point, or not, having, like, there's this idea that we need to achieve something by specific uh, ages. And I truly believe everybody is on their own timeline. And I think we are starting collectively to move away from that need to do it. But I still feel it is almost, though, an unconscious pattern that still exists, an unconscious, unspoken comparative behavior. Because I think we do have a lot of times when we're not, you mentioned like not knowing our own necessarily like baseline frequency. And a lot of times with not knowing about ourselves, we'll simply try and understand ourselves, I think, subconsciously by comparing ourselves to others and looking what others are doing. And really, that's not a way to, I would say, engage in positive relationships too much, or I'd say really understand who we are and understand what our path is. And I think just by sort of eliminating the need to like get somewhere or get to a specific accomplishment, state of like enlightenment, like everybody talks about enlightenment, like eliminating the idea of needing to reach a destination, we can sort of just really hone in on what is my baseline like frequency, what are the moments that I'm like feeling happy, how can I or, not even just happy, just content and like in my being. And like, how can I make that something that is more consistent? I think is ultimately the question that we should be asking. And I wonder what that would like, what sort of uh, that would look like at a collective level if that was sort of something that was emphasized. Because I've worked in schools and with kids, and one thing that really uh, has not driven me away, like I'm still open to like doing it. I'm not teaching in a school right now, but one thing that's always sort of disheartened me is not having these sort of questions that are asked of people who are young and really still learning about the world and still learning about themselves. Because when we get to even just our age, it becomes a lot harder than when we have conditioned beliefs about self and the world to really unpack those. But I feel like if we could reach younger ages with these questions and like learning about um, regulating emotions and establishing that baseline, you know it
Yeah.
it's wonderful to think about what that would look like on a collective level.
No, I really resonate with what you're saying here, Evan. And I think the part that you touched on of what is it that you just said? The referring to emotion regulation
Yeah.
and how, yeah, there's something in that where, the notion of being able to regulate one's emotions, being able to adapt to different situations, right? I think that points to a key functional aspect of mindfulness, but also like seeing it at a collective level is that we know when we're in that state that's not based in fear, when we're in this receptive place with open awareness, it's much more conducive to creating connection and intimacy. And I think, yes, our young people are really poised to struggle in this next generation, I think, in a big way because of the technology that we're facing and a lot of the ways in which they're engaged with their devices. As I'm talking with kids, I'm noticing they have a little bit more challenges reading facial expression and understanding affect. And obviously I work with some kids that have developmental disabilities or things like that, so those are different cases. But even just some of the kids that I see outside of that, just that there's not this ability to necessarily tune into another being's way of thinking about things. In psychology, there's this notion of theory of mind, meaning that like I can take on, what was Evan thinking in that situation? Or, like what might he be experiencing in this moment as I'm saying this to him? And I think that touches on a big aspect of if everyone were to improve their own sort of mindfulness capacity, that would really decrease a lot of the distress and a lot of the emotional and interpersonal angst that collectively we struggle with. And I think it's a lot of times it's so unnecessary. It really brings us, I'm seeing all the ways in which people respond on social media, or seeing sort of like what's happening in the mainstream media or in any of those places where it's just like our emotional circuits are just so like wired up, like it's just kind of ginned up in this way that's like, yeah, whatever your belief is, we're going to take that and amplify it a little bit. And it's like it doesn't leave you as much room to care about other people. It's the whole notion that when I'm sitting there judging someone, there's no room to connect or to care for them or where they might be coming from. And that's something that I think is so fundamental to social cohesion and so fundamental to being able to work collectively towards whatever problems that we're going to be facing in the future. And I'm sure there will be many that we really should emphasize this a lot more than we are. And that's teaching that with kids has been something I'm very passionate about, but also I'm really happy to know that that's something that has been more integrated into the schools and has been an emphasis as of late.
Yeah, I have seen it being picked up a little bit, and it's beautiful to see, because I do think that, you know, with, you know, like how I mentioned, mindfulness is almost sort of a buzzword right now. If anything, like you can make jokes about that and laugh, and but like if anything, it's
Right.
good that it's a buzzword, because that means more
It's a
people are
net
talking.
positive for sure.
Exactly. It means more people are talking about it, more people are really engaging with these concepts. And it's interesting when you know, you brought up so many good points. And when technology specifically, it's interesting because the capabilities of technology that we have, you know, in theory, we could connect with just about anybody on the planet in a matter of minutes, like with our technology. And yet it's used right now. And maybe it's because we're still in these like baby stages where, you know, it's like, it's almost like human society, like modern society, is in like its adolescence, and like we're going through the growing pains, and we're, you know, really, you know, a teenage boy, for example, like, do teenage boys have a cap on their emotions? Like most of the time, not really. Um,
Right.
so, but if, and I feel like maybe that's sort of, since we're in these early stages, that's why we see this disconnect. And that's why sort of, you know, I truly believe like the collective level is just really a macrocosm of what's taking place for most individuals. So, you know,
Mhm.
that divisiveness and judgments that we see, and the lack of really embodying and the ability to embody another perspective, is really because it's perpetuated in the mainstream, because that's how a lot of people just sort of go through their day to day and go through life. And um, you know, I feel that
Yeah.
eliminating those judgments against others and seeing through sort of the fear and the divisiveness really starts with seeing through the judgments about ourselves, right? I mean, I've noticed like I used to, like it was natural for me to like hold judgments. I think a good example was I started going to the gym as like a senior in high school, and like I had never done anything in mindfulness and like any of that, but like it's very easy when you go into a gym to like compare yourself to others and like place, maybe you see
Mm.
like I'd see like a huge bodybuilder guy, I'd be like, that guy must be on steroids, or just some sort of like silly judgment.
Right.
But like ultimately those judgments came because I was judging myself and judging my own sort of
Yeah.
worth in an environment. And I feel like if we can really, like you mentioned earlier, that the notion of acceptance, like that will really eliminate the judgments that we place upon others and the divisiveness within society, because we have more of that acceptance just within ourselves, within who we are.
Mhm.
And I think it takes
That
the knowing of who we are to really embody another perspective.
that really hits on the idea of, you know, comparison is the thief of joy, and for
Mhm.
many reasons too, right? Like we think it's, oh well, you're just going to think that you're less than, but even what you're talking about, like where, you know, what if you think you are better than somebody, right? Like does that really help you, and does that really in some way, you know, feed a part of you that might be unhealthy? And, you know, to your other point about like looking at other people, I think we're noticing a phenomenon where people are very disconnected with themselves. And at least this is kind of my perspective on it, that whatever seems to be like the most, you know, you talked about society being in this sort of nascent stage of the modern world, and like whatever it is that everyone else is excited about, all of a sudden we latch on to this, or we become over identified with this as though this is somehow a very integral part of ourselves. And I can see I can see a lot of ways that that can be, you know, used for the positive, but also, you know, in society we've seen that be used in a very negative way in the past. And so I worry about that sort of as this adolescent stage sorts itself out. The mood swings that we experience are going to be very tumultuous over the next decade or two, and to bring more people into a place of non-reactivity and being able to, you know, think before you act. And it comes like to our next topic of like intention, you know, like being able to like really accept that somebody is coming to something from a place of intentionality, right? And I kind of I push back on the idea that I've heard several different times, like intent versus impact. And I don't really care for that framing of it, because I don't think they are mutually exclusive terms, right? I think intent and impact matter, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not, and I think that so many of these really complex issues get boiled down to that these days, where it's like, oh, well, this should matter more than this. And it's kind of like very black and white thinking, which is actually characteristic of pathology and psychology, is when things are framed in very black and white ways, oversimplistic ways, it causes us to react in extreme ways, because then, if something is all or nothing, then your behavior should be in accordance with that. And so I really push back against a lot of the different things where I have, it's either this or it's that. And I'm like, well, most things are a combination of several different factors. And so I think that intention is one of those things where, like, people need to, I think, just give each other a little bit more of a break these days. Like, have you ever said something stupid that you regret?
So I guarantee you I have. Oh yeah.
Right. And that just like is the epitome of what I think is we're seeing, is that, people are so critical and self-judgmental about what they're thinking and what they're doing, that it's getting projected onto everybody and everything else. And that is what I would say is a big factor in sort of diagnosing this problem, is that we need to be able to live in the gray, because it's going to continuously be that way. Like, there's not going to be a right or wrong explicit answer as far as like where society moves forward from here. But we can take things that we know are unproductive and, start to phase them out. And we can start to take things that are helpful and holistic and integrative, and really bring together, billions of people who were never actually supposed to be that closely connected, to, surviving in harmony. I think that would be ideal.
Right. No, and I definitely agree. And I truly believe the idea that there is enough abundance to go around for everybody. I don't know exactly how that looks like, obviously, because, we don't live in it. I think anybody claiming to have the very specific correct answer, be weary of it, because like you said, it's all, there's no such thing in my eyes as the black and the white. Everything really does live in the gray. It lives in the ambiguous, like, nature. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about, an embracing of the unknown, and sort of dropping that fear of the unknown, because, it's impossible for us to truly, uh, as much as we talk about embodying perspective and stepping in other people's shoes, it's impossible for us to truly uh, know what another person's experience is like, and know what it's like to be in a situation that we're not. And so it's all about, like, recognizing positive intention, and recognizing, are we trying to do good? Are we trying to move forward? And understanding different perspectives, because people a lot of times might do something that maybe on the surface, to me, if I'm in a specific frame of mind, a judgmental mind, that action may look or, feel foreign or destructive for some reason. But when I get underneath it and look at sort of their intention, and I look at specific reasons as to, their line of thinking, I can, understand that. I can say, okay. And maybe even if the action wasn't, it turned out to not be great, I can understand that it was coming from a place of their perspective, whatever that may be. And I really feel that is, that recognition, and that striving for our own, positive intention to do good and be good, is how we're going to, I think it's the way we have to move forward, really, because I don't think we can continue in this adolescent stage that we're in.
Yeah, I don't think that it's something that is very sustainable, and I think that's evident by just like looking at this past year. I mean, we were talking about how it feels like time passes differently. Like, either 2020 felt like 10 seconds or 10 years, and I can't quite put my finger on which one it was.
Yeah.
Given whatever day of the week it is, and what the next new thing happening is. So I think, yeah, more to your point, when we can come to a place within ourselves where we aren't constantly having our emotions and our belief systems sort of amplified and turned against each other in a lot of different circumstances, I think that's when we'll be able to sort of break free and come back home, come back to a place of like, you know, giving somebody the benefit of the doubt, or even if you're not giving them the benefit of the doubt, like recognizing like, yeah, like this person must really be suffering. Like if, you know, sometimes I have to do that with, you know, when I'm talking with somebody who I see is like really just acting kind of in a aggressive or angry way. And it's like, wow, like imagine what they must be going through internally, like to feel the need to project that outward, like whether or not they're conscious of it, that's a defense mechanism, or something is being, you know, deployed in this moment for their survival needs. And that also makes it easier for me not to get caught up in sort of telling them like, oh, well, you know, here's why you're an asshole, or,
Right.
you know, exactly laying that out. So it's, and we can also find that in meditation practices of metta meditation, the loving kindness meditation, where, you know, you start with somebody that you really care about, who you're deeply passionate towards, that, you know, you don't have any conflict with, and just emanating a sense of joy and goodwill in their direction, like genuinely wanting them to be happy and healthy and free from suffering. And then, you know, working into people that are neutral, just somebody that you run across on the street that you see walking around, maybe at the park or grocery store. And then eventually, you know, working with yourself as that can be difficult, or people that are challenging to do that with. And by doing so, we cultivate this sense of compassion and connection that, you know, it really removes this sort of like, oh, me and mine, what I need to do to protect myself. Like, as I was saying before in meditation, that you recognize in certain moments that there is no like center to this. There is no you like that you really think of. This is just like a constellation of thoughts and experiences that we constantly reflect on and think that's us in the world. You know, one of the yoga teachers up here in the Bay Area that I've worked with, Richard Rosen, he teaches usually like a 15 to 20 minute breathing practice at the end of every yoga class. He teaches like 2-hour classes, and one of the things that he says is, who is the breather? As though this is, you know, and you can also do this with other things, like, you know, who or what is hearing in this moment? Or, you know, when you look out, like, where is it that you're looking from? Like, these are fundamental ways that we can sort of question this like way in which we attach and over identify with everything around us, that gives us sort of a context that we can feel more grounded in the known, like, oh, well, this is my space, like this is my house, these are my things, to then going into a place of like, well, I don't really know where I am or what's going on, but this is a new experience. Like every day is kind of unfolding as this new story of life.
Yeah, definitely. And that's beautifully put. And I very much have taken that mentality on myself, where every day is a new experience, and every day, you know, we can set this intention to just learn and explore and sort of just see things from, you know, maybe in a way we didn't see before. And I think that's really the essence of what it means to, you know, question who we are. Cause I mean, that's the $1,000,000 question, right? Like, who am I? Like, you know, you can go so deep with that question, because it goes beyond, uh, you know, you have the safe response of where I could say, I'm Evan McDermott, I'm from this
Right.
place, born at this time. But like, those are really just ways we define ourselves. What is it like that is deeper than that? And like, is it a feeling? Uh, is it a space, a space we embody within ourselves? Like, what is
I
sort of
think
our true nature?
I think it goes right down to consciousness and its contents. You know, we are, you know, consciousness is like almost this thing that's happening through us, and we're, you know, just one part of it. And consciousness is very much what it's like to be something. There is something that it's like to be a human being having a human experience, and there is something that it's like to be a wolf or a bear, and to have that experience. And so, being in this form and coming to terms with it as it is, I think is sort of the lifelong goal. But further to your point of like, who am I? I think it's sort of an existential question that we get stuck in, as though that matters, right? Like, who are you? Well, does it really matter? Like, I've thought of different times where, and I don't know if you've had any experience with psychedelics at all, but different moments where it's like you can feel like the most insignificant thing in the world, like a grain of sand among 1,000 other grains of sand, and it doesn't feel all that bad. Like nothing has been lost because of that. And I think that might be where it's sort of taking in a sense of humility, that is it really that important, I was telling one of my nephews, he was getting into a scuffle with his brother about something. He's like, oh, he always does these kinds of things that annoy me. And I was like, hey buddy, don't sweat the small stuff. Like, it's just, there's so many strong experiences to happen in life that when we find, even in the little moments, we're just complaining or bitching about whatever, your brain hears that. And that, just as much as you can take times to really be present and to be focused and feel good about that, if you're just complaining to complain, or you're just saying, oh, this sucks, or whatever, there's things that we do a lot of the times that just kind of come from habit, then that can unconsciously serve to reinforce some of these old stories that we work so hard to let go of.
Definitely. And I would 100% agree with that. And I think it's that willingness to like let go of those stories. It kind of plays back into everything we've talked about, and the mindful awareness of when I might be complaining, or when there's I can get into a scuffle with somebody and it's like, well, does this really matter? And I think, the idea that we are just we're all part of this consciousness, as, interconnects all of us, because we all are conscious, we all are here. And really in this, we're here on earth in this, plane of existence. We didn't ask to be here. Well, maybe we did, if depending on your belief on that, but, and we're here. And so is that enough? And I think that's maybe that's a question we can ask ourselves, is just being here, isn't that enough? And
I love that. And that to me, I think, is the best question that we can be asking ourselves when it comes to contentment, is like, what's insufficient about this moment that it's not enough, right? That we have the gift of experiencing life, and that's something that we can either embrace here and now in this moment, or we can be caught up in whatever other thing captures our attention.
Right.
And to really take that mindset and adapt it to all these different situations in which your sense of self is embodied, that really comes down to, well, how is it that we can enjoy life? How can we live with that sense of presence? And that's hopefully what I try to help people do in teaching mindfulness and yoga and in the therapeutic work that I do. And I'm really happy that you're got this podcast and helping people expand their consciousness and to really, diving into some of these deeper questions and looking at it from all these different people's perspectives.
Yeah, no, I greatly appreciate it. And I know that in the work that you do, having taken your workshop, you do a good job of just that. So, and I feel like exploring these, these topics, these concepts, like, I feel like it feels part of my like purpose of like what I'm supposed to do. But I also do it, I guess you could say I have selfish reasons, because, I still love to explore these concepts within myself, like, and just sort of be in this present space, have these conversations, and really just learn and unlearn, and just embrace that, that question of, is this enough? Like, yeah, that's something that when I ask myself that question, it brings just deep fulfillment and contentment. It's like, I'm here to be myself. I'm here to just enjoy life, and I'm not going to get into the smaller, old, beliefs about self and all of these different impulses and uh, just ways of the past. And I feel like now, a lot of people like to use the new year for, setting intentions, setting
Oh
goals.
yeah.
And now, new year, new me. And again, I guess I've laughed about it many times in the past. And I always make jokes about the gyms being full and, but I think it's a very positive thing to set these intentions. And uh, I think it could be a jumping off point of sorts, because I know there's a lot of people who want to leave 2020 in the past. It has been a year of turmoil, chaos for a lot of people. Um, I mean, what do you have any like suggestions for setting positive intentions, like, going into new year and what sort of people can focus on?
Yeah, that's a great question, Evan. I think that one of the best things that you hit on there is that we try to do too much at once. And going back to almost the very beginning of our conversation, where these new habits or building new organizational skills or anything that you want to change about yourself, you need to have a system in place that's going to facilitate that. So instead of saying, well, I'm going to do these 5 different things this year and totally crush it and, do them for 3 weeks and then kind of be like, oh, I can't, I can't stick with it. I've found that if we take smaller steps, like baby steps, like maybe, doing 1 or 2 things maybe in January and then add another thing on in February and then again in March, so that you can constantly scaffold. And I think when we do that, when we're able to scaffold skills, it's like an athlete, right? If you go and try to hit an 80-mile-an-hour fastball or something before you go and catch the baseball and throw it back and get the sense of how the ball moves through space, then you're not going to hit a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. But over time, you build up the skill and the competency to do that by exposing yourself to greater and greater challenges. That would be my advice, is that, take on really simple, clear, defined things that you want to do and scatter them throughout the year and sort of let them build upon one another. So that way you get a sense for what it's like to have this new thing, and then to add increasing complexity makes it much more manageable when we already feel like our to-do lists and our checklists are 1.5 miles long.
Right. No, I would definitely agree. And uh, I like to think that, when I see, like when I walk into a gym, for example, on January 1st and everything's taken, like in a way, I feel pretty good about that. I'm like, all right, a lot of people are in here, self-improvement game, let's go. And it is kind of disheartening when it's like come February and it's back to like normal capacity. But I think just
Yeah.
that scaffolding, like you mentioned, that's the way to do it. Cause I've noticed in my own past of when I try and do too many things at once, it sort of all implodes. And it's just about the process of knowing ourselves, process of like
Mm.
trying new things, but not being afraid to fail, like getting rid of that destination addiction. Like we're not gonna, if you join a gym, you're not gonna look like Arnold Schwarzenegger after 1 month. Like it's just impossible. Like it's just more about, if anything, it just get comfortable with your body, get comfortable with who you are, and just
Yeah.
acceptance and
Yeah.
integration.
Letting it be a process is something I think we struggle with.
Yeah.
Being able to know that things take time, and that we oftentimes are trying to get to somewhere, but the vast majority of the time was spent getting there. So the notion that we can be with the process, that life is mostly, made of the process. It's
Yeah.
not made of the content or the actual specifics of it. So although it's helpful to set up clearly defined goals, like I want to be healthier this year, like, well, what does that mean? Like setting up little things that make up what healthy behavior looks like, or what healthy eating looks like, or exercise, like being able to define that more clearly, I think is what gets challenging. But rest assured, if you're making those small changes over time, things will change. And it might be in big ways, or it might take a while, but you'll notice that just by having something that you're disciplined about, that you stick with, you're going to create a much better environment for being happy ultimately, because that's where the meaning is found, in the process of doing it.
Yeah,
of being.
definitely. And I would definitely say that destination addiction is almost like a running from the present moment, if you will. It's a running from like it's a, we set these goals to become better. And, I think a lot of times maybe we need to like analyze what are the reasons that I'm setting these particular goals. What is
Hmm.
there not to love about me or feel fulfilled about me in the here and now? And will
Hmm.
this external goal ultimately solve that? And I think maybe a lot of times the answer might be no, and which is why we see a lot of the deterrent from specific, New Year's resolutions, for example. Just, it's the perfect
Hmm.
example you could put in terms of goals not
Totally.
being fulfilled. But um, so Kayvon, I mean, we're at about an hour. I mean, we've hit on some amazing topics. Like I'm feeling really like fulfilled and extremely grateful for your presence on here because you brought up so many great points. Is there somewhere that you would want to send the listeners to that they can, find your work, interact with you, um, wherever
Well,
that may be?
the feeling is mutual, Evan. I really enjoyed this conversation, and it was nice to kind of have this back and forth and collaborate and watch some new ideas emerge in real time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, listeners can find some of my yoga content on YouTube at Yoga with Kayvon, and also my new Instagram page, which is Mindful Life Solutions. So I'll be posting some more there throughout the year, and I do offer private lessons if people want to do some individual yoga, but my time is pretty sparse, so I don't really have too much room for that at the moment. But yeah, I really appreciate this. This was really cool, Evan.
Yeah, this was fantastic. I mean, let's plan on
And
doing
happy
it.
birthday.
Oh yeah, thank you, thank you. Another year old, another day older, really. But who's counting? 25, quarter century. But let's plan on doing this again soon because this was a lot of fun, and I loved the free flowing and the collaboration, and it's how we create this new world that we want to embody. So
Yeah, I'd really like that.
awesome, let's do it, and I'll put all the links that you mentioned in the episode description, and so listeners can scroll on down, and just click it. It's right there. But yeah, that's about it. That's going to wrap up this episode. Kayvon, once again, thanks so much for coming on.
All right. Take care, Evan.
All right. You as well.